Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster Base Plate on a 2019 Ford Fusion. When flat towing your vehicle, there's going to be 5 main components that are going to be required. The first one on the vehicle side is going to be the base plate, and that attaches to the frame of the vehicle, creating a solid mounting point to attach to your tow bar. That's going to be your second component, which is going to be your connection point between the base plate and the hitch on the RV. Now your base plate will have loops for your safety chain loops, which is going to be your next component, and just in case of an accidental disconnect, it's a solid, nice, secure way to keep that attached, even if things were to fail. Now, if that was to completely catastrophically fail for whatever reason, you do have your supplemental braking system, and that slows and stops the vehicle as you apply the brakes on the RV, but also it does have this breakaway cable, so if it was to completely separate, it pulls that cable on the front here and it's going to put the brakes on the vehicle. That way it's not rolling down the road. Now your last one that we're going to talk about here is going to be diode wiring, and that's going to take the light functions from your RV and transfer them to your vehicle, since your vehicle is kind of becoming a trailer, so you're able to get your running lights, turn signals, and brake lights just by plugging in your umbilical. Now normally you might have seen maybe some magnetic lights, but your diode wiring can also allow you to not only get the light functions but run 12-volt power through there, so it is really beneficial to go with those. Now this is what your base plate's going to look like when it's installed on your Fusion, and you can see it's tucked in pretty well. You are going to be trimming out portions of the grill here to make it all fit, but the base plate's nice because it gives you your safety chain loops, a bracket for your 6-pull, and I was able to actually use the bracket of the base plate to mount up our breakaway switch, and overall it looks pretty clean. And when you are ready to flat tow your vehicle, pretty easy. You're just going to go ahead, take your removable arms, put them in at an angle, and then just twist until this pin clicks in, and that's going to keep it in place, allowing you to hook up your tow bar. And whenever you're not towing, pretty simple, you just pull that pin, give it a half twist, and it goes back to looking pretty OEM. Overall, the installation, it's pretty tight fitting, and there is a little bit of trimming involved to a lot of different pieces, but follow me step by step throughout the install and you'll be able to get yours installed. Now for our installation, we are going to need to get our fascia off, and that way we can get everything bolted up. And our first step to be able to start pulling this out is going to be taking off our radiator shroud here. And it's just a series of plastic push pins, so kind of work your way over. And to get these popped out, pretty easy. You have slots on both sides. And I'm using a trim panel tool. These are really, really handy for plastic push pins, but a flathead also works pretty well. So just pry up that center section and then pull underneath it, and that should come out. Now there's going to be a ton of hardware that we're going to be taking off the vehicle, and I highly suggest having a nice organized spot to keep them all. It doesn't have to be step by step, but you're going to want to make sure that you have everything. That way reinstallation is a lot easier. So just make your way over the shroud, make sure you get all these plastic push pins, and then we can pull the shroud out and set it aside. Now with our cover gone, we're going to go ahead and get our 10 millimeters that kind of follow along the fascia here. Now in the instruction manual they say that there's 4, but we have 1 here on this tab, 1 on the other side, and then 3 in the center. So we'll go ahead and get those removed. So now we're going to go underneath the vehicle with our 7 millimeter socket, and right here where we have this kind of underbody splash shield right in front of the tire, you're going to have 3 7 millimeter screws holding this portion up. We're going to go ahead and remove them on both sides. So now we're going to go along the edge here, and we're going to find that we have some 7 millimeters. So just kind of go along the front edge here and just follow that along, and you can go ahead and get those all removed. Now after getting our 7 millimeters off here, there's 3 of them down the center that we're going to go ahead and remove as well. And then we're going to be coming back with our 10 millimeter as we're going to kind of continue on taking off the rest of the underbody panels. Now these side panels here, you can see since it's split down the middle, we'll go ahead and remove these, and it should be just these 3 10mm bolts. So we'll get those removed. And we're just going to repeat that on the other side here. Now, in order for these to pop out, or to make it a little bit easier, we're going to take this underbody panel here. Yours may look different. It looks like they trimmed here for some quick access for oil changes, and some of their hardware is kind of mismatched, but just go along this outside edge of it and get all the hardware, and that way we can pull this down and set it aside. And once you get your hardware down, you should be able to drop it out. There are 2 plastic tabs, one on each side here, that you might have to pry out with that trim panel tool. Ours did not have those, but just go ahead and make sure you get that underbody panel taken down. And then we should be able to remove our front panels here. So we'll try to get these pried out. We'll just kind of separate this here. And we should be able to kind of slide it and get this out. And we'll go ahead and do the same for this side as well. If any clips or anything like that fall off, make sure you hold on to those, and we can put those in back later. So now we're going to head over to our wheel well, and we're going to have some 7 mils, 2 of them here, and then also a plastic push pin that we're going to need to remove, and that's going to give us access to the bolt that holds the fascia to the front quarter panel. So we'll go ahead and get these removed. And if this is tight, what you can do is hop in the vehicle and you can turn the steering wheel all the way to the right, and then when you get to the other side, the same thing, and that's going to give you a lot more access to be able to get to these. So now with our fender liner kind of peeled back, if you reach straight up, you're going to feel that there's going to be 2 bolts. One's kind of tucked back a little bit further. Now, depending on the model and different manufacturer variances, it could be a 10 millimeter, it could be an 8. Ours is going to be a 10 here. So I'm going to go ahead and get those taken out. And you may kind of have to use your fingers here to just kind of feel that. But yeah, they are, so roughly one's here and one's kind of tucked back here. So just kind of feel for it and get those removed. So it is tricky to find that front one and kind of get hardware on it. Now, a way that you can get to it with our panels removed, you can see straight up. If you have enough extensions, you should be able to get that a little bit easier from the bottom here. So if you are struggling, that's a good option to at least attack it. Now we still have a few attachment points, but since we've gotten these taken out, that should open this up a little bit. And what we're going to do is just put some painter's tape on not only the fender side, but also the fascia side. And this is going to help for when we take it off, but also put it back on. As it kind of rubs, it can scratch the clear coat. So this will just kind of prevent any damage from occurring, or at least give us a fighting chance. So I'm going to run some painter's tape on both seams on both sides of the car. Now underneath towards the front grille, there's louver control, and that's what actuates the vanes on the front grille. So we are going to need to unplug it here. There's just this plug that's facing vertical. There should be a tab on the side. So we'll go ahead and get that pushed in and then unplugged. And now we do have 2 10 millimeters. We're going to get those out. There's also going to be these plastic push pins, so we'll get those separated as well. So with the plastic push pins taken out, we can go ahead and you'll see these clips, they hold on this wire loom for that louver motor. So just kind of push on them. You can kind of pry on the center section there, but we'll go ahead and get this separated. So you got the 4 right here, and then there's 1 on the side too. So go ahead and get all these unclipped. So now on our driver's side, there's going to be 2 electrical connections that we're going to be separating. The first one here is going to be this plug. Now there is a larger one here. We're going to leave that alone for now. We should just have a tab here on the back. Now sometimes they can get a little bit tricky. This one popped out well, but what I found is if you push them in, sometimes it'll loosen it up, and then you should be able to pop that out. So there's this one, and then just trace this back, and you'll go up a little bit higher here, and this one mounts to this portion right by the fascia. So same thing, just push that tab in and we'll get this separated. So now at this point, you're going to want to grab an extra set of hands to get your fascia off. It can be a little bit large and it kind of flops around. You also want to have a nice spot to set it up A lot of times the box from the base plate, if you lay that out flat, that's going to be a good spot to put your fascia, just somewhere where it's not going to get scratched. So to get this off, there's some plastic tabs here on the top that kind of lock it in place. So just kind of lift up here and you'll see this little nub here just kind of holding that in place. And this should start to kind of slowly release. Now there are alignment tabs on the side, and on our driver's side they kind of popped out pretty easy. On this side I'm just going to kind of pull down to get those alignment tabs separated, and then we can get the fascia pulled apart. Might kind of have to pry in this area here. So you can see those tabs just kind of go up into your fender well. So just putting a little pressure. It does look like there's a plastic clip here as well, so I might need to pry on this area, but this is the only part that's holding up our fascia. Putting up a little fight here, but you can see I have my one pin taken out. It's just this plastic push pin that's holding this up, so just take your time here. Okay, so I did have to pry on that plastic tab a little bit here. Now don't pull too far if you do have any of your electrical connections. So we have our louver motor and our, looks like our ambient air temperature sensor as well. So we are going to need to separate this here. And so with those clips that we pulled off, just pull that along with it, make sure it's not caught, and then we can set our fascia aside. Now we're going to go ahead and cut out this section of our lower air dam, and that's going to give us clearance for our crossbar of our base plate to go on. Now I've just marked it along, but you're really just following this line pretty flush here. So what I recommend is either a Dremel, or I use an oscillating tool, or a multi-tool as people call them. It works really well to kind of just go along this edge. Now this driver's side here, this whole portion will be knocked out, and then all of this will be gone. So if you need to mark it out, by all means, it makes it a little bit easier to follow along, but we'll go ahead and get ours cut off. Now with that all removed, you can go back with the file and just kind of get those burrs off, give it a little bit cleaner look. Now on each side we have two 13mm bolts, and you can see where they go through the weld nuts, and we're going to just loosen them up enough to where the top portion of this bolt is going to be flush with the weld nut. So just kind of lower this down a little bit. Right about there. And we're going to do the same on the other side as well. So now we're going to need to enlarge some holes. So where we just dropped those bolts down, you'll see that there's a hole up top, and there's a hole underneath here as well. And we need to pass this large bolt through. The top, it's pretty close, but we're going to need to waller that out a little bit for this to pass. So I suggest having this handy, that way you can see if this passes all the way through. And they recommend a 19/32 drill bit, which is pretty large. So I'm going to go ahead with this one. It's pretty close, and just kind of waller it out as necessary, but making sure that we're able to pass that bolt through. So go ahead, and we're going to do this on both sides. So just enlarge the hole and just check again each time that you think you're close. Make sure that this passes through. So now that we have this one passing through, we'll go ahead and do it on the other side. So now at the front here, we have the top portion of our air dam, and we're going to be trimming a little bit here. I do believe this is where we're going to be mounting up part of our base plate. So we'll trim this out and kind of following this nice and flush. And then this has metal behind it, so I just kind of followed that outside edge, and then we'll go here, kind of get this section taken out. So we'll go ahead and we're going to repeat that on this side, and then these again. This rubber section can get a little bit tricky trying to cut through it, so if you have a pair of snips, it actually goes through it pretty well. But we'll go ahead, get the rest of this trimmed out, and get the rest of this flashing taken off, and then we should be good. Now we're going to go ahead and get our base plate, and you'll see that you have your safety chain loops as well as these two tabs. Make sure those are facing up as we put these in place. And we do need to kind of go in at a certain angle. So this side here, this long bracket kind of slides back here first. Now you will have to kind of go past the radiator, but as I put this up earlier to kind of mock it, it does seem like it's pretty tight here. So there's two options of what we can do. We can pry this open a little bit more, or we can kind of just grind off the bottom edges of here as it's going to slide over this. Now we don't want to take off too much because it does kind of hold it in place, and we'll be putting shims here, but just taking off just maybe about 1/8 of an inch total should be enough to be able to slide our base plate on. Now I went through with a file and just kind of filed down the top and bottom, and then since it was raw metal, I just put some spray paint on there to kind of prevent any corrosion from occurring later on. Now we should be able to get this slid on, and we're going to want to have we have our shims here, and these are going to slide in once we have our base plate in place. And our hardware that we're going to be using is the longer bolt. So get a flat washer, 2 of them, and a lock washer and a nut, and this is going to pass up going around our base plate. So once we kind of get this in place, we'll throw our shims in, pass our hardware in both sides. As I mentioned before, you got to kind of feed this in past the radiator, it looks like, a little bit. And you should be able to kind of do that on both sides. And then once you're kind of in position, if you need to, you might have to hit it again with a dead blow hammer or something along those lines to kind of get this in place. But now we can go ahead, it's holding itself up for now. So we'll get our shims in place here, and they are offset, so we'll just kind of line these up, make sure that they're aligning with the holes there. And it's pretty tight on this bottom side too, so again, we may have to kind of hit along here to kind of get this in place. I am kind of fighting to get these shims in. It's pretty tight, so what I'm going to do is pass my bolt and just hand tighten it up on one side, and that way that's going to hold it in place and allow me to kind of pry that open to create a space for our shim to fit. So this is just going to kind of temporarily hold this on there for us. Now to get these to line up was kind of tricky. I really kind of had to hit along these shims here just to kind of get it all in place, and then I just took an extension and then just slowly fed my way up and kind of used a hammer to kind of hit this around to kind of open it up to allow us to pass our bolt through. So what we're going to do here, take our bolt, put a flat washer, feed this through, and it is still kind of a tight fit here. So just kind of using a flathead here to kind of pry here on the metal just to give me just a little bit of extra room for this to slide in. So again, you just take your time here. You should be able to get this to all line up. Looks like mine's going through if I thread it. Just don't want to damage up our threads here. And once we get that passed through enough, we're going to go ahead, we're going to put our flat washer, our split washer. I may have to get myself a little bit more threads here, but then we're going to just finish it up with the nut here. Now, throughout all of this, until we get them all in place, we're going to want to leave these just hand tight. That way we can have a little bit of adjustment, because once you cinch it down, it can make it a little bit trickier to line up the rest of the holes. So just go through, you'll get this one in place. And then we're going to go ahead and repeat on the other side with that same layout of hardware. Now that we have these hand tightened in, we're going to go ahead and grab the shorter bolts, and we're going to be passing them through the long bracket that went back here with that 90-degree angle. So I'm going to be going on the back side. You can see my finger potentially. There's a hole there. We're going to be putting our large washer first, and then we'll feed this through. And again, you may have to kind of pry around with a either a screwdriver or a pry bar to kind of get this to fit through. And then once we get that passed through, we're going to follow it through with our smaller washer, a lock washer, and then one of the nuts. So we'll go ahead and do that on both sides. And again, you may need to kind of shimmy this around just to kind of get that to feed through. Again, we're just going to hand tighten these as well. And there is a small gap here. We might be able to feed our hardware in. It is pretty tight here, so you just kind of take your time. And I'm going to just back this out, and that way I can get my washers on here. Now we're going to come to the front here where we have this tab welded on and the holes that we trimmed out previous. So this is going to bolt up like this, but we need to make sure that they're enlarged large enough for our hardware to pass through. So just as we did before, we are going to drill these holes out. 3/8 drill bit should be enough. Now directly behind this is the radiator, so you're going to want to make sure that you don't go too far, and if you need to, you can actually put a piece of wood or a piece of metal behind here to kind of prevent damage from occurring. So just take your time here. And then we'll just give our hardware a quick test fit to make sure that it fits through. And I'm just going to go a little bit larger here, just waller out those holes, and then we should be good. Now we're going to be repeating the process over here as well, so you can go ahead and enlarge all those holes. Now for bolting it to the base plate here, it's pretty easy. We have a split washer, then a flat washer, so just make sure you have that there, and then we'll have the nut on the back side. So we'll go ahead and get this hand tied on. Now the top one's a little bit different, as we're going to be using a weld-on nut plate that we're going to feed in the back, and that way we can get that threaded in. Now for our top ones, we're going to be using that same combination, but we're not going to be using the nut, as we are going to be using these little weld-on nut plates. So what I'm going to do, just because of the angle, I'm going to feed this from the bottom, but I'm going to just give this a quick bend, and that's going to kind of align this a little bit better. So underneath here, just feed this up kind of between our impact bar and our radiator here, and just kind of get those threads aligned. You should be able to kind of see it through there. It is a little bit tricky. So we have that one there. I'm going to pass this through and kind of get it started on the threads. Now we might need to enlarge the holes or kind of just move our bracket around a little bit again, just to kind of get everything to line up. So I'm just using my screwdriver here, and the other hole is leveraged to kind of align that up. And I think once we get this one actually started, it should kind of have that other one in place. Now what I found to work best to kind of get this in place is to kind of bend this back, but also put a bend here, so when we feed this up, it kind of sits flush against this. So once you get your other one in place, we're just going to repeat the same process here on the other side. So go ahead and get those hand tightened in place. Now I've gone ahead, everything is now in place, and really that's going to do it for the base plate portion of the install. Now there is going to be trimming obviously required to get your fascia to fit back up, but if you're doing the rest of your flat toe components at the same time, I highly recommend leaving the fascia off, and that way you can run the rest of your components and it'll be a lot easier. Now we're going to go back and tighten down all the hardware, and I'm going to be putting a little bit of Loctite on the threads. I kind of leave it off because if you put it on when you're hand tightening, it can get a little bit tricky. So I'm just going to go through and kind of put some of this red Loctite on there, and that's going to make sure that long term they're not going to back out. There's also going to be torque settings with all of the hardware as well, so refer to the instruction manual to the size hardware, and then with a torque wrench I'm going to go back and torque these all down properly. Now on most of these you are going to need to put a wrench on one side and a socket on the other, especially when doing your torque wrench. That way it's not rotating as you tighten it down. And also with the torque wrench, you're always going to want to try your best to get to the nut side, and it's a better bite down on the hardware rather than tightening it on the head of the bolt. When you tighten the nut, it's a little bit better seated. So if you can, try your best to torque down on the nut side. Now when it gets to the ones that have the nut plate here, you can go ahead and tighten them down. Leave those on there even when you start to use the torque wrench. It's very possible the little tabs will break off, but if they don't, what you'll do is just kind of bend them back and forth, and eventually that small little tack weld should break. So don't be too worried if they're still hanging there. They're pretty easy to get off. Once you get everything properly torqued down, also don't forget to tighten back up this radiator support. Now, before we get our fascia on, we are going to have to trim, obviously, to make clearance for our base plate. So what I generally do is mock this up on our vehicle. So you do have these little tabs here. So I'm going to just go ahead and kind of get this at least on enough to where it'll support itself. If you need to, you can put some hardware in just to kind of hold it in place. But this is going to really give us a nice shot of where we need to trim out. So while mocking this up, I've gone ahead and just used a chalk marker here, and that way you can wipe this off if you need to make any different adjustments. But I've gone ahead and made sure that I have clearance for everything. You can see that our safety chain loops as well as our bracket for our 6-pole do slide in through the grill pretty well, but we are going to have to make these holes for our removable arms to go in place. So what I'm going to do is on here, you can use just some snips and just kind of file around it. I'm going to go ahead and use my multi-tool and just kind of cut this out. You can use a Dremel or whatever. And start small. You can always add a little bit more. And then we'll just go back and mock this up once we trim it out and see if we have that clearance. Now I've trimmed up our fascia and got it to fit. We are going to need to trim these underbody panels as well, because as we kind of line this up, you can see that it's going to make contact with our base plate. So I've gone ahead and marked it out with chalk marker. We're going to be doing this on both sides, so go ahead and get this cut out. So now we have these trimmed out, and all we need to do is just get this front fascia back in place, and we're going to just do the reverse order that we took it off. So if you need to, you can refer to the video or your instruction manual. Now we do want to remember to plug in both of our plugs here when putting the fascia on, and also our ambient air temperature sensor. We peeled this off previous on our fascia. Make sure that we route this down and plug it in, and then we'll just throw a few zip ties on there to make sure that it all stays in place. So I'm going to go ahead and get my fascia put back on. So now I have everything buttoned back up, our fascia is on, so all that's left to do is tie up any of the other connections of the rest of our components, including our diode wiring here, and then we're ready to get our car in flat tow mode, hook up to our RV, and hit the road.